So now that we've done that, let's jump into. Oh, okay. Here we go. I'm gonna go past. So this is a Graham Stephan. Graham Stephan, I guess he's a wealthy real estate guy in his early 30s. I guess he became a millionaire in his 20s. He's a huge Dave fan. This is the guy that has the cardboard cutout of Dave Ramsey in his house. Takes pictures of it. So him and his buddy are interviewing Dave Ramsey and George Camel, or Skippy, as we like to call him. And they're asking about risk in return to debt. And we're going to analyze this because it's a little wonky. Not wonky, hinky, I think is probably the better term.
You would say debt's bad because for the average person, that is a good principle to live by. And with that, I kind of agree with you. However, if people do utilize debt in an effective way, such as Graham, very responsible, very well researched on the markets and how he can leverage his money with that, do you think that is a more effective way to grow fast if you're calculated with it?
It is a more effective way to grow fast, if that's your goal. But what people leave out of the discussion is that you've increased your risk exponentially. More debt equals more risk, period. And so, after I went broke, I had to analyze and go, okay, what went wrong here? And because I had never lost money on flip. I was not behind on the notes. They just called them. They had the ability to do that because it was commercial paper. It wasn't traditional mortgages. It was 90-day paper. And so, what it amounted to was, so I had proven track record of making money. I mean, I did. I probably owned 2,000 pieces of real estate in my life. And so I was doing a lot of flips. And some of them I was doing in 24 hours. I just buy them and flip them to another investor and make 10 grand and keep walking, that kind of stuff. So I was doing 100% finance. Equity money. I didn't have any money. I talked to a guy to give me a 100% deal on this house. I flipped it. I made 10 grand. And I talked him into doing it again. Then I talked him into doing it again. Then I talked him into doing $1 million too. And with that one bank. And so it set me up. And so after I crashed, I kind of.
Okay. So a couple things here. There are risks associated with debt. Debt in and of itself is not more risk. Sometimes it's actually smarter to have the debt than it is to not. I'll give you a great example. You're starting a business, okay? And you need to loan, say, $100,000 to start the business, and you get a loan from the bank. So you get 10 or 11% interest, whatever, and you're paying off the loan every month, and it's a 7-year loan, whatever. Now, let's say the business goes under, right? Now, you can then bankrupt the business, right? And the loan, most of the small business loans like that are secured by the federal government, so the bank's not really out. They're covered, right? The feds lose some money, but the feds plan on losing that money. That's why they put that program together. But now you don't owe that $100,000 anymore. However, if I'd have done it the reverse way and put my own $100,000 into the business and it tanked, I'm out that $100,000. So I actually took more risk by putting my own money in. Debt in and of itself is the reason you're paying interest on it is the bank is sharing that risk with you.
Right.
The lender is sharing the risk of the investment. So actually debt in and of itself it's a way to lessen the risk because somebody else is sharing it with you.
Right.
So this idea that debt in and of itself is risk, debt it can be if you're over leveraged, if you have too much debt.
It doesn't necessarily have to be.
No, the concept behind it is it's supposed to minimize your risk. But it gets misused. And if it's misused, then, right, like we said before, credit risk was one of the unsystematic risks. If I have too much debt and I can't pay it, that's a big problem, right? Which is what happened to Dave, is he took too much debt. To give you a little history lesson on kind of what happened here. So it was the Competitive Equality Banking Act of '87 that kind of nailed him. And this is sort of what happened. So back in the 80s, and you could only pull this off if you were a wealthy white person and male, Sorry, there's no way you'd have walked into a bank as a woman, Lacey, and they'd have given you a 90-day loan on a house.
So I would have been shut out of that whole thing too.
Yeah, especially in Tennessee where they live, you probably wouldn't be allowed to get a checking account or a credit card back in '87, back in those states. So yeah, and especially if you were like a minority, it wasn't going to happen. So it was mostly these banks that were kind of smaller institutions, or they were like savings and loan or credit institutions where they made a lot of their money on mortgages. So what they would do is, let's say I'm a young realtor, like a white guy like Dave in my 20s, and mom and dad are realtors and they have a lot of money, right? So the banks know them. So the managers know them. The owners of the bank know them, whatever. And I walk in and I want to borrow some money to flip a house, right? So they give me a 90-day loan for, say, $50,000 to buy this house that I'm going to flip, right? They give me the money. I buy the house with the money. I turn around and try and sell it as quickly as possible. And like Dave was saying, he could do it, pretty quick, right? And make 10, 20 grand here, whatever. And he kept doing that and doing that and doing that. But he never put any of his own money into it. And he got to the point where he was doing it so much that he's got $1.2 million over that in loans, and these short-term loans, right? That his business wasn't even worth that. He couldn't cover that. So that's what he filed. When they called in the loans, he filed for bankruptcy. The reason they called in the loans is because the government came in and they did the Competitive Equality Banking Act of I think that's what it was called, of 87. It's CEBA or whatever. Anyway, the reason they did that is because of this. There were a couple things. One is there was a lot of sketchy inter loans between banks. There was a lot of like handshake kind of under the table loans and stuff that weren't regulated, kind of like the stuff Dave was getting, right? And furthermore, since banks make a lot of their money on mortgages, right, and especially on rents from mortgages, right? Here's what happened a lot in the 80s and especially in the 70s. You're the young white guy realtor, right? I'm the bank. I know you. I know your parents. Blah, blah, blah. I have some properties in this area of town. Let's say it's a lower income, primarily black populated area of town. And the real estate's good, but the problem is that it's all lower income people, right? But I would like to make it higher income people of, I don't know, say a different color scheme. I would say, Lacey, I'll give you a 90-day note to buy this property that this family's selling. So you go buy it and then turn around and try and sell it for more. So now what have you done? You've driven up the cost of that house. So you've driven up the cost in the neighborhood. And the more and more you do that, you keep driving up the cost. It drives up the rents to the point where people can't afford it and they get evicted. And now I can move in and gentrify the area and make millions. So the idea was to try and push black people off their properties by driving up cost. I'm not saying Dave was doing that. I'm just saying as an ex.
It was that time frame.
Well, he was flipping houses. I'm not saying he had a motive like that.
Right.
I'm just saying, as an ex-cop, there's enough reasonable suspicion to investigate, right? That there's something's going on here, because he's a young guy in his early to mid 20s, and the banks are giving him $1.2 million in loans to flip these properties for 90 days unsecured. And then what happened is when they passed that act, these smaller banks got bought out and absorbed into more regulated banks, right? And they came in and said, well, wait a minute, this guy has 1.2 million in loans, but he's not even worth that. So we're going to call in the loans. That's too high risk. He's over leveraged. We're not doing this anymore. And that's what happened to him. And that's why he went bankrupt. He won't tell you that whole story, but that's what happened. But it was, they could get away with it. It was legal back then when he was doing it, but it was very questionable on whether or not it was ethical. And
there's probably a lot of people that were doing that. Hence, they had to do something about it anyway.
All right, so we'll dive back in here with Dave.
I had to go through a CSI, an autopsy. You go, okay, why did the patient die? And so because everything I was taught, I grew up in the.
First off, CSI is crime scene investigation. It's not an autopsy. They're different things. Just to be nitpicky.
When you're in the real estate business as a profession, one of the rules is they take your risk meter out and they sit on the table and they break it. So you have no ability to perceive risk because everything's good, everything's going up, and it always works. And the mythology that just because something worked once, it's always going to work every time. So I had to go through kind of a healing of my heart in that regard. Oh, this is risk. Wait a minute, OPM, other people's money. Yeah, it's kind of got a get rich quick slimy vibe to it, and all that. But there are people that more intelligently than that, use debt, and so there's a spectrum there. But even those are taking on risk. And so when you have, Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you can tell who's skinny dipping. So when you stress test with an economic problem of some kind, outside variable or inside variable, inside your organization or your life, inside your portfolio, or the economy, like a quarantine type thing comes up, or inflation.
Hang on one second. Go ahead.
So, yeah, what he said, just bothers me because, in the earlier segment where we're, going through risk and debt and their relationship with each other, he just, said again that that if you're taking out debt, you are taking on more risk. But you just talked about sharing the risk, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it can be, but it's not necessarily the case that means that you are taking on more risk, because actually, if you just put all of your own money into it, if I put my entire personal savings into this thing and it doesn't work out, my whole life savings is gone.
Right. It's about are you calculating the amount of risk or the amount of debt versus what you make, right? So if I owe $10,000 a month in debt and I'm only making $5,000 a month, yeah, I've overexposed, I'm at risk. But if I'm making $100,000 a year and my debt is $10,000 or $100,000 a month and my debt is $10,000 a month, then it's 10%. And it might actually be worth it to me to not put my money at risk. Right? And he misinterprets the Warren Buffett statement. The Warren Buffett statement about, well, the tide goes out, you can see who's skinny dipping. The point is, yeah, if you've taken on too much risk, you're basically naked in the water. But if you're wearing shorts and a bikini or whatever, the tide goes out, you're fine. Right? That was the joke about that. So Warren Buffett's talking about being over leveraged, not about debt being a risk as a thing just in and of itself. So